There are two ways that you can invest in economic growth. You can invest in nation-building infrastructure, or you can invest in people through education and skills. When it comes to infrastructure, of course, this government does neither. And this budget, 2018, is a hoax. It is a triumph of spin over substance, not a dollar of new investment. When you look at budget paper number 2, it's there for all to see. There on page 137, Infrastructure Investment Program, ACT Infrastructure Investments, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0. You go through the next table, Major Project Business Case Fund, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0. New South Wales infrastructure investments, the same. Northern Territory infrastructure investments, the same. Outback Way, the same. Table after table. Queensland infrastructure investments, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0. Roads of strategic importance, 0. South Australian infrastructure, 0. Tasmania, 0. Urban Congestion Fund, 0. Victorian infrastructure investments, 0. Right across the board, what you have is no new investments, simply an allocation of money that was already in the budget. And where has that allocation gone? In the next financial year, 1%, $1 in every 100 of the new projects announced in the lead up to the budget and on budget night are there with funding. Indeed, across the forward estimates, 15% of funding, more than 85% of funding is there not for this term, not if you vote for the Turnbull government for another term, but if you vote for whoever's in charge of the mob opposite for a term after that, 3 terms into the future, before 85% of the funding flows. The fact is that we need infrastructure investment now. Congestion costs the nation some $16 billion a year right now. But what we see, and it's there in budget paper number 3 on page 46, is the actual investment. And it falls from $8 billion in 2017-18 across the forwards to $4.5 billion in 2021-22, a drop of almost half. And of course that's consistent with what the Parliamentary Budget Office found when they independently examined the budget papers after last year's budget and warned that Commonwealth infrastructure investment over the next decade would halve from 0.4% to 0.2%. And it's consistent also with the fact that if you compare this year's budget across the forward estimates, you compare it with last year, it is $2 billion less, which is what the Australian reports today, based upon the work and analysis that is there in the budget papers themselves. And Infrastructure Partnerships Australia, the peak organisation that I addressed last week, certainly agrees. All of the sector is onto the con that these people have been engaged in. A budget of deceit. In the lead-up to the election, we saw a grand announcement about Western Sydney Rail through Badgerys Creek Airport along the north-south corridor. How much is in the budget for construction? 0. $50 million for a study. That's all it got. Grand announcement, a promise of 50-50 funding into the future, but not a single dollar. Of course, we know not a single dollar in the budget for Brisbane's Cross River Rail project. Not one. Identified by Infrastructure Australia way back in 2012 as the #1 project, funded in the budget in 2013, cut by this government in 2014, and remaining that cut there, even though it's a precondition for expanding the rail network in the Sunshine Coast and Gold Coast as well as Brisbane, because you need to do something about the capacity, just like the Melbourne Metro project is a precondition for expanding the rail network in Melbourne. But of course also there was another front page story, the airport rail link in Melbourne. But you have a look at the budget papers, you have a look at what's there, and what's there of course is a statement about they'll have a chat to Victoria about an equity investment. So off-budget funding, they think you can build infrastructure for free, because the only way that you can have an off-budget funding of an infrastructure project is it has to fulfil two criteria. The first is it has to have revenue, that is people paying for tickets to go on the train or on the toll road or whatever piece of infrastructure, which is higher than the operating and maintenance costs. Now, there isn't a rail line in Australia, not one, that meets its operating and maintenance costs. That's the nature of public transport. It's an investment in our nation. It's one that boosts an economy. It's one that gets people to and from work and to and from their activities and produces a national economic dividend. It doesn't produce an economic dividend to the owner of that particular piece of infrastructure, let alone be able to pay back the capital investment of a project that will cost more than $10 billion. So once again, a big announcement leading to absolutely nothing. Sham funding. As the Grattan Institute have said this, if infrastructure projects are never going to make a commercial return, the government should stop pretending they will. And if they are worth building at all, the government should fund them transparently on budget. It's exactly what any transport economist has said. That's what everyone in the sector have said, and they know that this is the case. Indeed, Matthias Cormann, the Finance Minister, argued this in the Cabinet. When he was asked on Neil Mitchell's program, when he's been asked on radio about this, he has refused to defend this off-budget funding because he knows that it means that it simply won't be real. Just like the NAIF, the No Actual Infrastructure Fund, that was established more than 3 years ago, hasn't got a single project in northern Queensland, hasn't got any major projects funded. The IFU, remember that? Remember that? They don't think through their acronyms very well, this mob. The Infrastructure Financing Unit, established by those opposite, was going to transform infrastructure investment and going to mobilise all this private capital into projects. Guess what? Not a ZAC. Not a road, not a railway line, nothing. And now it's been transferred. Now it's been transferred into the Department of Infrastructure. The fact is that even when they announce funding on budget night, they don't deliver. 1 out of every $5 that was announced in their first 4 budget was never spent. $4.7 billion gap between what they said on budget night 2014, 15, 16 and 17, when you go back and look at what was actually invested. Underspends in roads, $2.7 billion. An underspend on the Western Sydney Infrastructure Plan of $700 million. Underspends on Northern Australia roads, beef roads, black spots, heavy vehicle safety program. Now, from time to time you can have delays, but the fact is that every single one of this government's programs has seen underspends every single year. There is a better way, and Labor showed the way last time, and we will again. Real investment in roads, real investment in public transport, real investment in nation-building infrastructure. We lifted infrastructure investment from $132 for every Australian up to $225. And Australia went from 20th in the world to first in advanced economies in terms of infrastructure investment as a proportion of GDP. We did it before, and next term, when we're on the Treasury benches, we'll do it again.